Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Friday, the 2nd of December, comes to you from London. And we look at the charts again. We start with our long-term charts, our medium-term charts, and our short-term charts. It's a weekly, daily, and 60-minute. And the 1% log scale, 0.5% log scale, and 0.1% log scale on the 60-minute chart for point and figure targets. So this just gives us a great overview as we go through everything. And we see here dollar index is still having made these new highs. This is still a very clear long-term breakout of the trend. We'd like to see 3 weeks. I like to see 3 weeks really just to be convinced we've done that. So it might be maybe another week or so to be absolutely certain we've broken out, but we are seeing these upside targets, some of them now very significant, activated on the point and figure chart. So that concurs with the view that dollar is probably going to have a similar year next year as we saw in 2014, a significant re-rating of the currency. And so we see that in the daily chart since the election, that playing out. We see that we've really just run here, but we are pulling back at the moment, and this is the whole point of trends within trends. We are pulling back, so dollar is just undergoing a period of relative weakness, and we're just seeing a new downside target on the 60-minute chart, not yet activated. We'd need to really fall below 100.5, certainly 100.6, and then we would activate that downside target of about 2%. Doesn't mean that we go there, of course, because we've got an upside target as well, so the picture is a bit mixed. And we've got these bigger, longer term trends really pushing us in that direction. So this is likely to be a short-lived counter trend move, but for now, the dollar is falling off. And if we take a look at the euro chart, we see the inverted position here. So euro is weak long term, weak on the medium term chart as well. We see that there, and so we are just testing these lows. But for the moment, we've got a little bit of strength showing through in the euro. We've got new upside targets, 107, 109. We are just seeing that kicking in. So interestingly, we are seeing targets to the upside. If we look at Japanese yen, we see here that that is again just hitting some long-term cloud resistance. Here's the trend since the election in the US, really strong, showing that dollar strength is really clear here. But again, we're just teetering onto a sideways move. Not quite the down move we saw in the other charts, but it is just selling off a little bit. So dollar for now is just a little bit overbought. We've reached this target that was given, and so we now are just experiencing a little bit of a sell-off in the US dollar. If we look at sterling, much the same picture, strengthening against the dollar. Really interesting here on the 60-minute chart. We've got an upside target to 126.98. Let's say 127. We've got a downside target that isn't yet activated to 123.85. So that's 2% down, nearly 2% downside, and 0.7% upside. This target also says about 1.85% upside. So it could go either way, and we are on this transition where the new trend is kicking in. Have we broken this downtrend? So quite interesting there. In fact, if we look at that chart, we see this downtrend has been in place for quite a long time. All these downside targets. Now we've got some new upside targets. Is this just a counter trend move or the beginning of a new trend? Of course, we'd need this daily chart to cross to really feel more strongly that that is the start of a new trend. Look at sterling against the euro, strengthening here as well, just coming through on the cloud. So on this chart, on the daily chart of the sterling euro, looks like euro is going to have a less good time now than sterling. So quite interesting there. And we look at Swiss franc, much the same, not quite through yet, but sterling recovering there too. And if we look at the Aussie dollar, we see here just another proxy for sterling strength. It is improving as well. Then we take a look at markets. Looking at the US stock market first of all, we failed to hold the 2200 level last night. We came back about 10 points, back to about 2191, back below the 2200 level. Not yet a sell on the 60-minute cloud, and we see here that we still do have this upside target of 2263 on the short-term chart, and lots of upside targets on the long-term charts. We did make a new high. That's the key thing. We did make a new high. And we're still kind of holding that new high position, but we do need to just hold that 2200 to be sure. So keep an eye out for that next week. If we look at the Nasdaq, Nasdaq really struggled, had a big sell-off the last couple of days, back below the cloud. So this is clearly bearish. The daily chart just shows how this 4900 level is just a step too far for the Nasdaq, and really interesting there that we just can't break that level. So at the moment, that 4900 level is just proving too difficult. We do have some short-term upside targets, but this big move down will give us a new target, and especially if we go lower. And we see that showing through here on the daily chart. We've got a new downside target as well. It's not entirely bearish. It's mostly a bullish chart. We're bearish on the short term, still bullish on the long term, but for the moment, we're really struggling until we get through that 4900 level. The Dow, of course, is much smaller number of constituents at 30 bellwether stocks, and at the moment we are still holding that. So those bellwether stocks looking pretty strong. New all-time highs for the Dow, still holding there. The Russell had an amazing run, just selling off a bit, but not looking quite as bad as Nasdaq. So the broader 2,000 companies in the US looking still pretty good since the election. If we take a look at the futures, here we see the futures, and quite interesting that we're seeing the sell-off there in the future. Not massive sell-off this morning before the market opens in the US, but we are just seeing that this uncertainty creeping in. And if we take a look at the Nasdaq E-mini, here it's really clear tech is having a bit of a bad week, and it's interesting just seeing that there. If you want to get right down into the detail, we can just go to the 1 minute chart. So if we just open that 1 minute chart, press the T key, and we do have this downside target of 45.50. That's a 3.6% downside and a downtrend. If we go to smaller box sizes just by clicking this here, we do see we start to lose the targets. Go smaller still, go to the 1x3, and we see really going right into the micro. I mean, watching these change in real time is really key. You watch the new targets coming on. So we do have some downside targets, but nothing quite that significant. So it's going to be a case of watching that Nasdaq E-mini chart develop through the day. If we take a look at FTSE, down 55 points this morning. Again, just really selling off here. Downside targets of 3.5%, 7%. So just looking a bit worrying, and we are through on the daily cloud now on the lagging line. We'd want a few days to confirm this. It's a struggle to see how the UK market would continue to sell off if the US market, which looks pretty bullish and strong, continues to rise. A lot of the US constituents, of course, heavily oil and mining related, but it is just interesting that we are seeing this downside kicking in. Not yet activated here, and the long-term picture is pretty bullish. Note the little sort of head and shoulders on the lagging line here. That just showing up on the weekly chart. It's interesting how you see these things on different time frames where you might not see it on the daily. You might not even notice it in the candles. The lagging line is quite good at showing that up. So just does look a little bit bearish for FTSE. The 250 much the same, making new lows this morning. Downside targets 1.2, 1.4. 5.3% downside. So it is just wandering out of the cloud here as well. DAX down nearly 1% this morning, really falling off a cliff. And we see here these downside targets as well. So that is a little bit disconcerting. We just can't break this 10,800 level. It just really is holding us back on the DAX. So we see that level. Until we break that level, it's really hard to see where the DAX goes. And if we just look at the range, we can see here this 10.2, 10.7, this 500-point range is really quite key. Break below that, and suddenly the DAX doesn't look so good. Just haven't managed to break on the weekly cloud, so still long-term bearish. Taking a look at the Nikkei overnight, still bearish on the weekly, but starting to come through on the price there, not yet on the lagging line, holding its strength. Of course, weaker yen is playing into that, and we still have 11.5% upside. So Nikkei looking quite okay. China less good. Off the Shanghai composite was down, but still holding the uptrends here in the short term. And if we look at the Hang Seng, that did have quite a sell-off, down 1.4% overnight. And we do have these targets that were given in September just playing into our hands here, so we need to be just a little bit aware of that. If we look at the Sensex, we see here as well that it is recovering, but it is a bit limp, this recovery. We do have some upside targets here, 1.5%, 5.7%. The Aussie market down 1% overnight, so Not a great end to the week there in Sydney, but we do see this weekly chart starting to look a little bit better, and we are holding the short-term bullish position. We do have upside targets. We need new highs above this 55.20 level to activate this upside target of 9%. Taking a look at Brent Crude, this has been the story of the week, really, and we see here that we are just crossing the cloud on the weekly, so we're about to turn bullish here in the long-term trend. Quite interesting that we are. The key thing is we've made this move and we seem to be holding it. That's the most important thing. If we can just hold this level, then that is starting to look like a turnaround for Brent, having moved above the levels we saw in October and staying there. New upside targets of 59, and on the long-term chart we're seeing upside targets of 58, 72. That's a 34% increase, and we do have short-term targets that have been activated as well. If you take a look, if you're trading Brent in the short term, take a look at the 1-minute chart. So if you're trading it by the day, here we see how we've moved up even this morning and we're holding these moves. This is just the last several hours of trading. Press the T key on the system and we get some targets, and see how these targets were given. These targets were given and met. So this is the OPEC move over a period of a couple of days, given and met. Now we have a new downside target, back down 5% to $50.90, holding us above that psychologically important $50 level. And if we want to then go down to smaller box sizes, we see we've got 52. Notice how these upside targets given and met. You really can't ignore these targets, especially if you're trading on the 1-minute charts. We do have a new upside target this morning off this big move this morning, 55.30. That would take us to new highs, of course. We've pulled back. If we just break above that sort of 53.90 level, then we activate that, and that's another move up. And of course, if we go higher than the run after OPEC, that is confirmation of the bullishness. So keep an eye on those charts. WTI, of course, the picture is very similar. We haven't quite just broken the highs here, not quite the same as Brent. So that is interesting that there's still some resistance hanging over the US oil price, and we are still just not quite through on the cloud yet, but it is looking better. There's no question. If we take a look at heating oil, again, breaking highs here, so that's quite interesting. Not yet through on the weekly, but we are just seeing the whole energy mix undergoing these long-term trend transitions, which is really potentially quite interesting. Definitely seeing it on US nat gas. We're through, quite strongly through there, and we are just seeing that kicking through again. We don't have any clear target. We do have a new upside target to over $4, but we need to move higher than this 356.5 level for that to really be activated. So we're just pulling back a little bit there. And again, if you're trading nat gas, just keep an eye on the 1-minute charts, those shorter term targets. Taking a look at corn, bearish at the moment, just holding the cloud on the medium term, but bearish below the cloud here. Much the same for most commodities. As softs, all pretty bearish at the moment. Got downside potential of 5% here on wheat. Quite interesting. If we take a look at coffee, it's had an amazing run in the months up until last month, but now we are just seeing that sell-off kicking in and bearish here. That 141 target given in the 11th November, and we are now clearly there. So we've seen a sell-off, really a quite dramatic sell-off there. If we take a look at some other things, sugar, we see here just moving to new lows as well, so quite significant there. Gold has not been performing very well of late. With everything going up, gold has been the one thing that's gone the other way. This tends to be the risk-on trade, of course, so if all the markets are doing well and going up, gold tends to suffer. Dollar goes stronger, gold goes weaker. It's the oil commodity metric, and we have just seen this bearish chart. Interestingly, we are just seeing some moves through here, and again, going to the 1-minute chart will allow us to just get a little bit of a heads up, press the T key, and notice how this trend has really been in place here, and all the time we're just bearish, bearish, bearish with new downside targets. Quite a significant one of 6% downside, but we are just starting to see an upside target kicking in here. We can get back above the 1200 level. We've probably then got a short-term reversal. Go to smaller box sizes, and we see here how these downside targets are playing through. We've still got this one here. If we're going to see new upside targets in gold on this 1-minute chart, that's the place we're going to see it first. So keep an eye on that. If we look at silver, silver tends to be a bit of a lead indicator in gold. not quite through on the cloud yet, but we do have an upside target, 3.5% upside activated. We don't have that such a clear target on gold. If silver goes up, well, then we'll probably see gold move as well. Copper has been the story over the last several weeks. Big long-term trend change here on the weekly. The daily chart strong. We've had real moves to the upside. You've got a massive 45% upside target here, but in the short term we have come back and we are below the cloud. We do have a 3.5% downside. So it's interesting that we see it will potentially fall before it rises. That's the classic thing of trends. Just need to understand that. If we take a look at US 10-year Treasury yields, the big move happened after the election. Through this weekly, the trend has changed. It's in line with what we're seeing in a lot of those energy charts. The trend has changed. The daily chart, 243, and we see here on the 60-minute chart, strong as well. This plays into the strong dollar, of course, and we're seeing basically we've got upside potential of 265, that's 9% upside, or downside potential of 236, not yet activated. We need to move back below this sort of 242 level, not yet activated. But what's interesting is that 246 is a 3% downside versus a 9% upside. So the sway is really towards the upside here. And quite honestly, if we'd sort of 236 as a level several weeks ago, we thought that was quite high. So it just puts everything into context. Last of all, a look at some tech. Apple just struggling a little bit here. Because that Nasdaq move overnight, most tech stocks just looking a little bit bearish at the moment. Amazon in the run up to Christmas normally quite strong, but just again pulling a bit bearish here. Even Facebook is quite interesting. We look on this daily chart, just coming back to test these lows that we saw in a couple of weeks ago. So that's not great. No clear downside targets on the short-term action. Go to the 1-minute charts if you're tracking these stocks, of course. Microsoft, one of the Dow constituents, is just falling back again, just below the cloud as well. A little bit of downside potential, but the upside targets are very much in place here, so quite key. That's it for today. Until Monday, happy charting. Have a great weekend. See you then.